Everyone. We are getting ready to start the Metropolitan Transit Commission Wednesday, May 24th meeting in the Government Center. And before we begin, I'd like to go ahead and do a meeting attendance for the voting members, and then we will go to the members that are attending as a part of their work with the commission. So, Ms. Altman?
Present.
Mr. Cagle?
Present.
Mr. Washam? Mr. Knox?
Present.
Mr. Bales? I'm sorry, Ms. Bales, sorry, it's been I have to tell you, it's a long day. Brent just asked me how many notebooks I have in my backpack, and it's a lot, so. All right, so Mr. Higdon is not here. Mr. Simmons? Mr. Edwards?
I am here from Raleigh, thank you.
All right, thank you. I see that now. All right. Virtual attendance. Mr. Lathrop? All right. So our non-voting members, Mr. Atkins? Mayor Reed, Mr. Reed?
Present.
Marion Holloway from let's see.
I'm Monroe, present.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Oh, there you are. I see you, Mr. Holloway. All right. Chrissy Oslin? Here. Mr. Tillman or his representative? Mr. Tillman? Yes.
Mr. Parker, I'm the co-chairman for CTAC.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Parker.
Mr. Parker. Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mayor Dirch from Concord? Any representative from Concord? All right. The next, anyone representative of Indian Trail? Any representative from Stallings? Any representative from Rock Hill? All right. Well, I want to make sure we have a quorum. So,
It's Bill Thunberg representing Mooresville, Mayor.
all right.
And Mayor,
Bill, I got you. Thank you very much, Mr. Thornburg.
Mayor Andrew Grant for Cornelius.
All right. Manager Grant. Let's see.
And Manager Roberts from Huntersville.
All right. Anthony Roberts. All right, is there anyone that I've missed that's online? We can see the way that you've registered in. So we have Mr. Thunberg, Mr. Grant. Mr. Grant? I'm not sure. Anthony?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. And I see our communications people up there as well. So Doc Russell. Randy Gates?
Good evening.
And Ms. Gates, you represent?
I'm with the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO. I'm Mayor Walker Reed's alternate, but he is here, so I will be in listening mode.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you listen. Thank you very much. All right. I believe that completes our roll call. I see Mr. Tillman has joined us as well. Brad, do we have a quorum?
So, yeah, Mr. Welch is here on behalf of Medhill, am I correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, and so we have an in-person quorum of 5,
Mm-hmm.
and, right, and so Mr. Edwards is remote.
Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, let's start off with our meeting minutes. The first item of business is approval of the April 26, 2023 summary. Is there a motion to approve the summary minutes that were distributed with your agenda?
Motion to approve the minutes?
Do we have a second? We have a second. Mayor Bales and was as well. Is there anyone that has any discussion around the minutes? Hearing no discussion around the minutes, all in favor, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4. I think that's unanimous among the voting members. All right, so the next item on our agenda is public comments. Do we have anyone from the public signed up to speak tonight?
Yes, ma'am. Chris Watts.
All right, Mr. Watts, thank you for coming back. Mr. Wallace, I'm sorry, Mr. Wallace. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's all right.
Hello again, and good evening. After last month's updates to the microtransit rollout, I'd like to take the time today to discuss another potential rollout that could improve the transit utility and traffic flow, both in North Mech and regionally. First, the upcoming Hambright Road Park and Ride should have a satellite bus facility incorporated in it to service and garage the Metro Rapid and Village Rider routes and buses that go through there, as well as a pair of east-west Metro Rapid lines should be implemented, one running from Concord's CK Rider Center to Hambright's Park and Ride, and one from the NC-16, NC-73 interchange in Denver to the same point. They should operate on a commuter schedule using I-85 and NC-16 to access I-485, each with about a 25-minute drive time. This potential rollout would help to alleviate significant roadblocks to transit access and mobility improvements throughout North Mech. A sizable obstacle for CATS providing services to North Towns is the distance from the Clanton Road facility. For example, the 99 Village Rider has to make a 23-mile trip to begin its daily trips, which, to put in perspective, is 5 miles longer than the Blue Line and Blue Line extension combined. And the same issue still applies to the Metro Rapid routes, even though they are meant for longer trips in the first place. A Hambright Road facility, being 14 miles closer than Clanton, would help to bridge that gap and increase service capacity. The east-west lines I've suggested would help put a dent in another massive obstacle to mobility and traffic that I'm sure the Northtown mayors here know and despise, Samford Road, which is the section of NC 115 running from Catawba Avenue to Old Statesville Road. It's 73 is meant to be a highway from Concord through Huntersville and Denver into Lincolnton, and there's a lot of local development on that particular cluster, so there's a regional and local traffic conflict. Those lines would help put a dent in that by providing a way to go that distance without necessarily stopping at that section. And so while the DOT has a plan to widen those lanes, that will only postpone the problem until the next wave of traffic demand hits it. The regional benefits of these lines would also be very promising. On the Concord side, the CK Rider station has bus lines extending throughout the Concord-Kannapolis area, including the Amtrak station. And on the Denver side, there's ample regional highway access for customers to arrive at the stop or perhaps carpool to it. And beyond east-west connections, there's also opportunity with commuter access to Charlotte via a Hambright Park and Ride Metro Rapid line. Whether it's through microtransit or my preference of fixed route services, the implementation of this facility and these routes would go a very long way towards increasing transit utility and mobility throughout the area. Thank you for your time, and again, I'd happily discuss this further with anybody after the meeting.
Thank you very much for your continued presence and recommendations and suggestions for the system to work better for those using it. So thank you very much. All right. There are no further public comments? So with that, we'll now move on to the Interim Chief Executive's Officer report. So, Mr. Cagle.
So Good evening, everyone. A couple things to report this evening. I will start with an update on the working group. The first thing that I will report is that in the future, we will add the working group as its own agenda item ahead of the Chief Executive Officer's report. But for this meeting, I'll start providing that report out, and certainly if Mayor Bales, who was in attendance as a member of the working group, would like to add anything, that would be welcomed. The first thing I will say is all of the members should have printed documents, should have received them by email today, but also printed in case you hadn't had a chance to check your emails. The printed documents are the post-meeting report, which we'll be preparing for each meeting, and then a working group work plan that Mr. Driggs had provided to the work group and discussed during the work group. As a note, we will also, by incorporating this into the agenda as its own standing item, these materials will be included as part of the packet in the future. So they'll be all one, they'll come together. And then the second document that you have is what we call the progress report. The progress report was developed by staff based on the 6 items plus a 7th, which is other. The 6 items that Mr. Driggs initially identified of concern or for us to monitor progress on, he identified these in a memo to the community as the working group was being created. So we will continue to monitor these items. This list may change as we resolve issues, or it may be expanded as other things arise or the working group would like to include in that. So in general, the working group met last week on Wednesday, a week ago today. Very good discussion. We walked through, not only did we walk through the progress report, but we also talked about a second item that the work group would like CATS to perform, which is a risk analysis. So we agree a risk analysis will be a good idea for us to perform. A risk analysis, the basic idea around it is to go through the department, identify any risks that we see. Once identifying those risks in all areas, risk to interruption of, service or to the operation in general terms to CATS. Once we've identified those risks, we then progress on through creating mitigating measures for those risks. And that helps us as we go through in future to, and hopefully it will help the MTC too, as we set budgets and define priorities for moving forward. Again, another good discussion and more to come on the risk analysis and the process to develop and identify all of the risk. Related to the progress report, there was much discussion on the progress report. I will say there was quite a bit of discussion related to the derailment or the truck overhaul maintenance. So as part of my report, I would like to share that CATS, NCDOT, and Siemens continues to work through an expedited schedule for conducting the truck overhaul maintenance. We have not executed a contract or amendment to the contract yet. We do have authorization from council to do that when we are prepared. In summary, what I would say is we're encouraged, as well as NCDOT, by the proposal that Siemens has provided us. Without going into the entire proposal, I will say that the proposal focuses on conducting the truck overhaul maintenance in phases. The discussion focused on phase 1, which would take approximately 12 months. So, based on the work beginning, the contract being executed, take about 12 months. Phase 1 focuses on two things. One is, as we worked with Siemens to understand how to complete the truck overhaul maintenance, they identified the bearings and wheels as the primary safety critical items that are involved in truck overhauls. And they identified those as the primary items involved that currently are not monitored by active systems on board the vehicle. So there are other elements to truck overhauls that need to be completed, but those other elements, the power systems for the vehicle are the primary element. That already, as part of the vehicle, has an active monitoring system that provides for safety if there is an issue with the propulsion system on board, and that safety system will stop the vehicle from operating. Again, similar to active monitoring and active safety features on vehicles, on passenger vehicles. But the bearings on our vehicles do not have those systems. So they identified the bearings as a primary safety critical item to focus on. They believe that with an expedited schedule on the oldest vehicles, the highest mileage vehicles, which is approximately half of the fleet, they can do what we'll call a bearing swap or a bearing replacement on half of the fleet in about the next 12 months. Excuse me, and then progress on through with the rest of the fleet after that. Again, the half of the fleet that we're focusing on are those first set of vehicles that the city purchased as part of the original Blue Line, and they represent the highest mileage vehicles, those vehicles that are at or well above 600,000 miles. The second component of Phase 1, which I am very excited about, is to add to all of the vehicles over the next 12 months an active monitoring system for the bearings. And that system, what it does is we add it to the vehicle and it listens for disturbances in the bearing, right? A bearing operating normally should be smooth. It has a sound to it. And so this system is attached to the vehicle and it listens to the bearing and it detects if the sounds change. It is a much superior monitoring system than checking the heat of the axles. The heat of the axles will determine if a bearing is failing, but they determine that at the end once the bearing has already started to degrade or is well into its, as it's already well degraded. This will detect it on the front end. This system is not deployed in North America. We will be the first major deployment in North America. However, the system is deployed worldwide in Asia and Europe and has proven very, very successful for operators across the world. Again, we think that this is a great system to do. It improves our safety awareness on the vehicles. And the system sends signals real time to a cloud-based server. That server then downloads to us so that we can see bearing health literally in real time. So we're excited about that. That system will take about 12 months to install across all of the fleet. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions, comments.
Before we do this, I want to recognize that Mayor Higdon from Matthews has joined us virtually.
Yeah, apologies, I've been trying to log on for about a half hour, so I'm in Cleveland, Ohio today. So
Okay, thank you.
glad to join you.
You don't have to apologize, really. So, okay, so questions, Mayor Bales.
So I just want to jump in and say there was a lot of good dialogue at this working group at our first meeting, joint meeting, and I was appreciative of staff actively looking at these other monitoring systems, because that heat strip, as was addressed by Mr. Cagle, you actually have to look at those, right? And the degradation of that bearing, it's already happened. The fact that we're going to be adding this active monitoring system to the fleet, the whole fleet, within the next 12 months, I think is a huge value add, not only for perception, right? Because there is a level of perception, but the fact that it will address maintenance opportunities for us. I think that is, that's the critical piece. Adding this level of technology, it may be a little expensive, but adding that level of technology is going to help us prolong that fleet too, and be a little bit more responsive to the fleet. One of the other pieces that I asked Mr. Cagle, I said, are there other monitoring systems across Europe and Asia that maybe we need to take a look at as well? And I believe the answer to that is yes, that there are a few other things that maybe we could take a look at that we don't currently use here.
Yes, ma'am, to that point, and we are focused on the matter at hand, the truck overhaul, but we are already having discussions with Siemens related to other active monitoring systems. Just like vehicles have progressed, technology has progressed, and there are a lot of wonderful improvements to actively monitor and inform you of the status of your vehicle. That is true for light rail vehicles as well, and we are having those discussions because we do think that there is potential for additional systems that will help us improve our awareness on the health of the vehicle.
All right. Any other, Mayor Knox?
First, Brent, I want to commend you for the work that you've done thus far. I do have a statement I would like to read, and this does go hand in hand with the work group as well as other things. Since sitting on the MTC, I've taken part in countless discussions around serving our community with a quality means of public transportation. I was in attendance as a citizen in 2007 when the first leg of the Lynx Blue Line was opened. I was in attendance as mayor of Davidson in 2018 when the Lynx Blue Line extension was dedicated. I was in attendance in 2021 when the Lynx Gold Line was dedicated. The latter two dedications were important to me, not only as a citizen, but also in my capacity as mayor of Davidson. As mayor, I have a seat at the table as a voting member of the MTC. Myself, along with the mayors of Charlotte, Cornelius, Huntersville, Matthews, Mint Hill, and Pineville, and a representative of Mecklenburg County, all have a seat at the table as voting members of the MTC. The MTC was created out of a need to provide public transportation services for our citizens with platforms from buses, STS, light rail, and commuter rail. Funding was specifically from a 1/2 cent sales and use tax created in 1999 for public transportation. The Transit Governance Interlocal Agreement was put into effect in 1999 as well. This interlocal agreement, made with and approved by Mecklenburg County and the 7 Mecklenburg County municipalities, provides for equal representation for each of its members and assures that town interests are represented. This was true until it wasn't. Collectively, we as a board have fulfilled the duties outlined by the interlocal agreement. In my 6 years on the board, rarely has there been an issue, occurrence, or motion at one of our meetings that hasn't been met with anything other than a unanimous vote, including the desire of the board to retain an independent third party to explore both the derailment that occurred in May of 2022 and the fallout for what has been described as a less than perfect environment amongst employees and management. This request was voted on unanimously, yet it was dismissed by city officials with a message to the voting members that the request was not within our purview because CATS is a city department and the MTC did not have the ability to expend city dollars on this request. This was the first time in my tenure on this voting board that I, along with other board members, questioned what our true role was and what actual authority we had. We, as a voting board, found out about the derailment of a CATS light rail car from a reporter. We, as a voting board, heard grievances from both a terminated employee as well as a former CEO from news agencies. And just yesterday, as I was getting ready for my town board meeting, I found out via a news reporting app on my phone that the chief of rail operations had been placed on administrative leave. I do understand that CATS employees are City of Charlotte employees, I have no desire now or in the future to delve into an employee's personnel file. What I do expect as a voting member of this board is to be kept abreast of the operational duties and fulfillment of those duties by employees and safety concerns of our public transportation platforms and not have to find out via the 6 o'clock news. My vision of my role on this voting board is clouded, and it shouldn't be. I'm proud to be on this board representing the 15,000 residents of Davidson and all who either choose or rely on public transportation. We have had conversations with this board, as well as at CRTPO and Connect Beyond, about the formation of a regional transit authority. In order to continue expanding the footprint of public transit across county lines, folding in many more municipalities, defining the role and scope of such authority has to be crystal clear. This can't be a funding mechanism for Charlotte. It has to be a true authority that has equal weigh-in from all stakeholders, potentially inclusive of state representation as well as DOT. The current interlocal agreement is outdated and does not allow for, in my opinion, the best interests of the voting members to be met. If we are to be partners in public transit, then we should be treated as such. This interlocal agreement has a sunset of June 30th, 2024. Tonight, I ask that we immediately move to take steps to restructure the existing interlocal agreement, knowing that until we can get our own house in order, the potential for asking others to join us regionally could be less than fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Knox. Any other comments? So Mayor Knox, I just want to make sure the request is specific, and so I guess what we will do at some point, I think, have a motion that this is the will and support from the voting members to do that. I think it's absolutely essential because we do have a deadline, and it's a very real deadline, and so I'm sure, again, there will be a unanimous vote to go that way. I think that we'll have to probably make sure that we figure out a process and a way to put this on the table. How is it done? When are the milestones to be met? What are the legal requirements that we have to have? But I think that it's, of course, an important document for us to move forward with and agree with the idea. At some point, I hope we will be able to. I've always said structure actually develops process. And if we don't have the right structure, we will not have the right process. If we don't have the right process, we won't be able to serve the people.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Altman?
I appreciate the comments from the Mayor of Davidson. I think he's identified the essential concern and necessary next steps, so I thank you for that. And then I would like to pivot and address some of what Mr. Cagle has raised initially. First of all, I appreciate you getting into the details regarding a lot of what you raised, because it is the kind of information I'm looking to hear. Obviously, I appreciate all work done, but just so you have a sense going forward, there wasn't a lot of detail in this post-meeting report, and that's fine. But I just want you to know that what you reported, which was not contained in the post-meeting report, where you really delve into some of the technical findings and processes, that's the kind of level of information I am looking to hear. And I'm glad that that will be a part of your written briefing that's in the agenda, not just verbal, but also in preparation in advance in writing. Thank you for that. So some specific questions I have. Well, first of all, I'm glad if you've identified something to figure out if the bearings are going to fail before they're literally melting down. Do you have a sense of how much it's going to cost?
Yeah, we're still working on final pricing. At this point, it is estimated at approximately $3 million for the equipment. The monitoring, because we are an early adopter, Siemens has offered us 5 years of free monitoring, because again, as it reports on time, right, literally real time, Siemens we think this is a great product, and they have offered us 5 years of monitoring. The monitoring beyond that is what I will call a de minimis cost, but it does have a cost. And we can provide you details of that. But right now, the estimate is approximately $3 million. As we finalize estimates with Siemens, we're happy to bring back and inform MTC and City Council of final costs.
Thank you. So I think it's been since early February that we got notice of this, and of course, it was almost a year prior to that all this happened. So when do you think the remediation of the defects will actually begin?
So Siemens is currently working on trucks. 2 sets have been sent out, have been returned. There were some quality issues with those, not quality issues. So the normal process for these, because they are very specific materials, on the first 2 sets, we expect them to have adjustments that need to be made after testing. So 2 sets have been sent out, returned, and we are currently working to accept those with Siemens. And additional sets have been sent out. I think we mentioned in the past that we were buying additional dollies. Those dollies have been received. I'm not sure that all 8 are, but a significant portion, I think 6 have been received. So as we're receiving those dollies, we are sending out additional trucks. What hasn't been executed, that contract, the base contract was in place. The new contract will extend it to the entire fleet, and it will work to expedite the process. And then it will include, or either this contract or a secondary contract will include the new monitoring system. So the work is underway and continues. What has not happened yet is final agreement on the change order, if you will, to the existing contract to help us start the expedited process.
Thank you. Have you had any heat strips indicate a problem?
I will need to check. We report that weekly to NCDOT. And so there are times when heat strips do exceed our internal 130-degree threshold. And when that happens, we do further analysis on the vehicle. And if it's determined that the bearing is at failure point, that it is an issue, that vehicle is removed from service and prepared for going to Siemens, the truck.
So will you follow up and let us know if that's occurred?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Have you received any letters from NCDOT in the last 30 days that reach a level of, I guess what my concern is that I don't know the questions to ask if I don't know what the problem is. And so I want to be clear that it's certainly my expectation, I think all of us, but there's like an affirmative duty for you to volunteer if you've received a letter that raises real alarms. And so it's hard for me to sort of describe it more specifically since I don't know what could be out there.
I
But
understand
have you
your
received
question.
any
I'm
such
happy
letter?
to answer it. I will also say I do have additional items in my report.
Okay.
But I'll answer that. That was one of the additional items, but I'll go ahead and just answer it now. We have received on May 15th and May 16th, let me check the date just to make sure I'm saying it correctly. I apologize, I have a lot of paper here in front of me.
Well,
I believe it's
I
on
can
May
read-
15th and May 16th. We received, here it is. On May 15th and on May 16th, we received 2 different letters each day, 1 letter each day. What I would say is we did not immediately notify the MTC nor City Council. We did make it available for the working group. The May 15th letter was related to what we call hours of service or HOS violations in the Rail Operations Control Center. There are requirements for how many hours a day and how many hours a week a rail operations controller can work. So they have hours of service requirements. There's also a requirement for how many consecutive days they can work. NCDOT conducted an unannounced inspection after we had complied with going to 2 controller minimum in the rock, and they found several hours of service violations. Again, these were all as we started to transition, as we made the transition into 2 controller minimum in the ROC. And we are continuing to monitor these so that we can reduce future hours of service violations. I will say I view these as serious that we need to address, but more in the administrative realm. For example, 3 of the violations related to how our employees clock in. So their shift starts at the beginning of an hour and it ends at the beginning of an hour. But what we realize now, they clock in and then walk to the ROC. So there are, one of the requirements is no more than 12 hours a day working in the ROC. There are 3 violations where an employee or employees had worked 12 hours and 14 minutes. The 14 minutes is attributed to 7 minutes after clocking in and starting the shift, being there just a little early, and finishing the shift, but taking 7 minutes to get to the time clock. I am not excusing it, but I do view it as administrative. And again, we are now reporting to NCDOT on all of these, and we are, Victoria Johnson, I think you'll recall last month, I introduced Victoria, and she is assisting to help us to eliminate these violations. So that is the first one, hours of service violations. The second was related to work orders in our rail car maintenance area. Again, administrative, but rules are rules. In the rail car maintenance area, when a work order is completed, under our internal rules, it needs to be closed out by a supervisor within 24 hours. So what they found was 90% of work orders were being completed accurately and on time, within a reasonable amount of time of that work order being submitted. But 60%, only 60% of work orders were being closed by a supervisor within 24 hours. Again, those are the rules, and I understand that, but again, it's administrative in nature, and we will address that to make sure that the rules are followed.
Okay, well, thank you. I assume we'll get a copy of those NCDOT letters, and just to say, I do want to ask as an affirmative duty for CATS to share any significant NCDOT communications that you receive on a more contemporaneous basis. And I assume you'll be briefing us in your further remarks on the Chief of Rail Operations, and if so, I'll wait till then.
Okay.
And thank you.
Would you like me to start there? There are several items. I am happy to start there.
Yeah, I don't know if any of the people online, like Mayor Edwards or Higdon, I don't know if I should.
I guess the questions to this point is, are there any additional questions to this point? Anyone online with additional questions or virtual with additional questions? Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead and proceed?
So let me start by saying to Mayor Knox and to the MTC, I apologize. This is one where, no, we did not inform you as these HR actions were being taken. That is not the norm, but I also understand that these are different times, and I will be better on that. Related to Mr. Harris, who is the Rail Operations General Manager, he has been placed as of Monday morning on administrative leave. Because this is an active human resources matter, that is as much as I can share with the board related to his status and the matters at hand related to Mr. Harris. What I will also say is Mr. Harris, as the Rail Operations General Manager, has oversight over all of the different rail divisions: rail operations, the ROC, rail car maintenance, maintenance of way, which is they fix the tracks, the MOW is what we call it, and parts and labor, other things. So those functions are now being overseen on an interim basis by a gentleman named Gary Lee. Gary Lee has over 20 years' experience in transit. He has been with Charlotte Katz for most of those years, if not all of them. Mr. Lee oversees rail car maintenance, but he has also served as the rail operations general manager for several years on an interim basis before Mr. Harris was hired. So Mr. Lee has stepped in. Our intention as this HR matter moves forward is if this becomes a permanent vacancy, we will conduct a national search, prioritize a national search for a new rail operations general manager. Again, I'll reiterate our organization structure for rail, myself, CEO, Victoria Johnson, special assistant, basically overseeing rail and all of its functions. And then on an interim basis, Gary Lee as the rail operations manager, general manager. All right. Moving to the next item. Since our last meeting, approximately 2 weeks ago, but 2.5 weeks ago, there was a rail derailment. There was a derailment. That derailment occurred in the yard at a very low speed. The train was traveling at approximately 5 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in the yard. The vehicle had no passengers on board. The vehicle had undergone routine maintenance and had been sent out on a test run, which is routine. Returning from that test run, returning into the yard, the vehicle left the main tracks and then entered the yard. And as it was going through a curve in the yard, a curved section of track, the vehicle derailed. The second vehicle in the train, so the rear vehicle and the rear truck derailed, right? So rear vehicle, rear truck. We are still conducting root cause analysis on that, and obviously NCDOT was immediately informed. They were on site, actually even before the rail vehicle had been re-railed. And they were on site as we conducted the initial investigation. So root cause analysis is still ongoing. What I can tell you based on initial evaluation of the vehicle, the question that everybody asked, including myself, was this a bearing failure? Initial investigation or initial examination of the vehicle would indicate that it was not. The reason for that is when railcar maintenance lifted the vehicle, they were then able to determine that the axle, the rear axle, was spinning freely. So the hallmark of a bearing failure is the exact opposite. The bearing seizes the axle, so it does not spin freely. This vehicle, the bearing spun freely. Upon visual inspection of the bearing, they saw no notable deficiencies with the bearing. They are examining some possible factors, but again, they have not determined the actual cause, and as soon as that is, or definitively determined the cause or contributing factors, but as soon as those are available, we will share those with MTC and City Council and others.
Any other items, Mr. Cagle?
Yes, the bus incident from last week, I'm sure you are all aware, last week on a CATS bus, there was an incident between a passenger and an operator. The incident was there was exchange of gunfire between the passenger and the operator. So there is video for this incident. As all of our vehicles have video, there is video. The video is right now under review by the TSA. If they determine that the video can be released, and we do believe that they will, we will then be able to release the video. We have prepared, and members, you should have received today, a narrative of the video of what happened, so that you at least have some awareness as to the chain of events. In general terms, what happened was the operator was approached by the passenger. So let me start. On board, there were 4 people: the operator, the passenger who was involved in the altercation, and 2 additional passengers. So generally speaking, what happened, the operator was approached by the passenger. The passenger came up to the front of the bus and asked the operator to be let out. They pointed, "Let me out here." The operator refused, which is standard practice. It is not our practice to allow passengers to exit the vehicle unless it's at a stop, and that is for safety reasons, right? This is an extreme example, but you wouldn't want to let somebody out if the bus was on I-77. Even if they want to get out on I-77, it's not safe for them. So the passenger asked to be let out. The operator refused that request, and that led to a verbal altercation which escalated over a series of several minutes. The passenger then produced a handgun, a weapon. The altercation, the verbal altercation, continued to escalate, and at some point through this, a few minutes in, the driver started to stop the bus, and the driver produced his own handgun, and the driver and the passenger exchanged gunfire there at the front of the bus. The passenger then proceeded to go down the middle lane of the vehicle, the center aisle, to the back door of the vehicle. The driver fired several more times as the passenger was, still on the vehicle, but at the back of the vehicle. So the driver stood up, fired several more times. The passenger in the altercation hit the exit button, the door open button, and exited the vehicle at the rear door. The driver exited the vehicle at the front door. Shots were again fired, and then the altercation was basically completed. The video, that's what you would see, what you will see, or what you would see in the narrative. A couple things to note here. Number one, the other passengers were uninjured. The driver, the operator, and the passenger who was involved in the altercation were both shot. The driver were both injured, transported with medic-reported life-threatening injuries. Both are stable at this point, and their condition is stable, and I think has been downgraded from that status. A couple things to talk to you about is, one, this, CATS is not immune to what I'm going to call the senseless violence that goes on in the community across the country. And this is certainly an instance of that. There is never any justification for any passenger to assault or threaten an operator, ever. It's not acceptable. I will also say, though, the operator, so the operator works for RATP Dev, our contractor. It is a violation of their rules for operators to possess weapons of any kind while operating the vehicle or while on property. So the driver is in violation of that, of their rules, and that RATP Dev is evaluating and will take the appropriate action that they deem for their employee. Secondly, I will say the vehicle, in this instance, while it is not policy to let a passenger out mid-route, it absolutely, the operators are trained that safety is top priority, their safety, other passenger safety. It would have been very reasonable for the driver to have acquiesced, to have allowed the passenger to exit the vehicle, regardless of whether or not there was a stop or not. Also, and I'm not sure people know this, I frankly didn't know this. all of our buses have different safety features to them. So clearly, the operator always has a radio that they can contact the Bus Operations Control Center. We've talked about the ROC, now we get to talk about the BOC. The Bus Operations Control Center, they have a radio that they can contact. But we also realize that it may not be in the interest of the driver while these kinds of events are going on. It may not be possible for them to get the radio. So there are 2 silent alarm systems that have triggers that are not inside of the passengers that are available to the drivers. The first silent alarm system opens a channel to the box so that they hear in the real time what is going on, and it sends a flag to them. Something is going on when this has been triggered. They hear the events unfolding, and they can request CMPD or security backup for the vehicle. And the second silent alarm or safety feature is, again, through a discrete switch. They can press a button, and the message boards on the outside of the bus will change from whatever they read to call 911, police help needed. None of these systems were activated during this event. So again, I understand the operators need to protect themselves, but there are avenues available and systems available in place to help protect the operators beyond gunfire on our vehicles. And I will say, I was asked this, do I think it's appropriate for our operators to be armed? I do not. I do not think it's appropriate for our passengers to be armed or for our operators to be armed. I think what's appropriate is for people to be unarmed with no weapons while on our vehicles, and for us to continue to look at other ways to resolve these conflicts. What I will say is, regardless of this incident, we do see some of these fairly minor disagreements escalate. We are committed. We have provided our operators with de-escalation training. We clearly need enhanced de-escalation training and customer service training. So to that end, in another announcement, I'm going to combine 2 of my items. We have recently hired Miss Elizabeth Prezzuti. Elizabeth, wave Elizabeth. Elizabeth comes to us. She has formerly been with CATS about 15 years ago. But she, most recently, she moved back to Charlotte, but before that, she was the CEO of Des Moines, Iowa Transit Authority. So when life circumstances brought her here to Charlotte, we were excited about rehiring her. She is our Chief Administrative Officer. She is helping us with bus operations right now while we do not have a Chief Operating Officer. And Elizabeth is, I have asked her to look at, as quickly as possible, creating a new enhanced de-escalation training program that will provide additional training, will also provide recurring training to the operators, not just when they're hired, but recurring, and provide them role-playing exercises, right? Not just a video that you watch or reading something, but letting them experience these things, role-playing, so that they can learn techniques for de-escalating these situations, and then having that training recurring so that it helps to reinforce that.
All right, Mayor Higdon, you had your hand up. Thank you.
Yes, I think the question was answered. My question was, do our operators routinely carry handguns? And apparently it is against the rules and probably is not the case. So that was the only question I had.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. Tillman?
How many years had this operator been driving for CATS?
I will get you an exact answer. I believe it's 20 or so. This was a long-term, what I would view as a long-term employee. I don't know if we have an answer. It's 20 or so. I can get you the exact answer. 19 years. I was close.
All right.
20-ish.
Ms. Ashland?
I was curious if you'll be able to report back to us later what the disposition, the disciplinary outcome of this is. TSAC advocates for bus riders, and I hate to ever be in opposition to the needs of drivers. They're usually in alignment, but I didn't get that narrative of the video. I don't think Mr. Tillman did either. I didn't know they were shooting back into the bus. That's extremely disturbing. It's a miracle that another passenger wasn't hit. So I'd like to hear if we're able to in the future, if what happens to this driver.
I have an update for that. As of this morning, the driver, RATP Dev, this matter was still under investigation. I am told, Mr. Hunter, so we are now confident. We are told that RATP Dev has separated with the driver. The driver is no longer an employee of RATP Dev.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Altman?
Thank you. So the systems were not activated, the alerts that he could have pushed, were they functional and he just didn't access them?
Yes, so the systems are part of our routine maintenance. We do test them routinely. We evaluated the systems or tested the systems after the incident. They did appear to be functioning and they were not activated.
You know, I'm sure it's very scary for all of our municipal workers who interact with the public, whether you're with one of the towns or the county or the city. I just, want to acknowledge that these kinds of random acts when engaging with the public is very scary, and I do deeply appreciate all of our public servants who try to serve the public, our firefighters who are serving the public every day. I assume you're coming to the close of your report, so I just want to ask before we totally move on to another agenda item. In your report on pages 44 through 47, there are, performance measures, safety performance measures, reliability performance measures. Normally I would just rely, but I guess I feel the need to affirmatively ask, is there anything significant represented by any of these numbers that you haven't already discussed with us today?
No, ma'am. So as you pointed out, there are the basic information that we provide each meeting. No, ma'am, nothing that stood out to me as something to report on from the monthly statistics.
Great, thank you so much.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. May I say one more thing? I'm sorry. When you go forward with the progress report, I see the first thing is derailment, but there's been like 4 or 5 derailments, so I might offer a request that you provide the update for all the derailments, because I don't know which one you're referring to here on this form.
Sure. So we are referring to the May 21st. Again, it links back to Mr. Driggs's letter. We're happy to provide that. I will say, like the most recent derailment, this derailment standing out as separate. Derailments do occur, and that is it's not frequent, but it's also not never. What traditionally, and with CATS, this one being different, May 21st being different, derailments frequently occur in the yard at very low speed when the vehicle is not occupied by passengers. It is not in revenue service. They do frequently occur when an operator is what we call switching tracks, changing from one track to another. It can occur because that is a more complicated procedure, and the vehicles, they can derail. And really a derailment in industry terms, think about a derailment it's when the wheel leaves its natural position on the track. That is a derailment. right? It has left its natural position on the track. So these do occur. We're happy to provide you information when they occur. But again, like the last one, the vast majority of these, May 21st, 22 being different, occur at low speed. And while we don't think the latest derailment was a switching, it does not appear to be a switching. It is similar to the others in that it occurred at very low speed in the yard. And so we're happy to provide that information when they do occur. We report all of that to NCDOT.
All right. Mr. Lathrop?
Thank you. Brent, I want to commend you and your team for all that you're doing in operating CATs and dealing with all these kinds of issues. And I know this is on the security and safety thing. It's not unique to Charlotte at all. And on any given day, there's all kinds of things going on. And I'm confident that you all are doing everything the right way in handling these specific things that we hear about, but also, other things that happen from day to day that we don't hear about. And I just want to say that that's so important from obviously the substance of safety of people that use it, but also from the perception of the community that uses, the light rail, our bus system, the Gold Line, et cetera. And once that gets created, it can be hard to turn it around. And again, that's not unique to Charlotte. And so I just want to emphasize that.
So I would like to wrap up. I'm sorry,
No,
Mr.
we got
Knox.
Mayor Knox. Mayor Knox.
Well, and Chrissy, I sympathize with your position on ridership, but I last night at our Board of Commissioners meeting, we accepted our first co-responder program in Davidson. We asked our police officers to de-escalate, but we asked them to be psychiatrists and psychologists besides being sworn officers. And I think it's disingenuous to ask a guy that drives a bus to figure out how to de-escalate on his own a situation where in our society today, because he can't stop where this guy wants to stop, you have shootout at the OK Corral in a bus. That's unacceptable on both sides of the table. It doesn't matter. But I think asking the drivers, even situational awareness and situational ethics that you put them through with de-escalation, I think you're putting too much onus on that driver being able to de-escalate something that may be beyond his ability to de-escalate it. And the answer is not to put more law enforcement on buses. We already have law enforcement, both our security as well as CMPD on the rail. I don't know if the answer is to put it on how many buses we run a day too, but I just think that asking the drivers to not only run their routes on time, but be psychologists to de-escalate a potential deadly and fatal occurrence is asking a lot. So I don't know where we go with that. I commend you for taking that workload on, but it's troublesome for me to know that that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I think the de-escalation training is valuable to provide them tools to help de-escalate. Will it work in 100% of scenarios? I'd like to think that it would, but I'm a realist as well. But I think that it provides another tool in the toolbox on top of security personnel. I think that it is not feasible to think that we will be able to have a security officer, armed or unarmed, on every bus at every day, every minute. I'm not even sure if that would be a desirable thing to some degree. But we need to have multiple layers, right? One thing I learned in the airport, and I think it's true at CATS, is security isn't a thing, it's many things. It's multiple layers. Being able to have those tools and properly trained in de-escalation may help, but it is one tool in the toolbox. I will also say, and I understand, I don't want this to be perceived the wrong way, but I will also say the vast majority of our trips across our system are conducted with no incident. We have drivers who can go their entire career with no incident, right? Our drivers are passionate about what they do. They have a hard job. They're passionate about what they do, and they care about the customers. But it is the reality that sometimes they're faced, just like all of us out in the community, with people who may have other underlying issues. And so I do want to commend the operators for all of their hard work and just make it clear that while these are the exception, they are never acceptable, and we have to find solutions to move away from these small incidents turning into a situation like this.
Thank you for that update.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Brent, for that report. So now we'll go to the informational items. Our first is an update from Mr. Lawrence, who's going to present the proposed changes on the service and travel market policies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the MTC. I have two presentations for you tonight, and they're really linked together in many ways. And so I'll go briefly through this first presentation, which details proposed changes to the travel market and transit service guidelines. Next slide. And so these two policies, and these policies have been around a long time. I think this coming weekend I'll have 23 years at CATS, and I remember sitting around a room and talking about travel markets and talking about our service guidelines, but they had some language in them that was outdated, and it was time to brush them off and think them through differently with all the recent adoptions to the 2030 plan, as well as the Envision My Ride effort. And the MTC 05 travel markets policy provides guidance for travel markets where transit is most competitive. When we realize that transit can't serve every single trip within an area, we can achieve to go for the trips that we're most competitive for, and that's what that policy helps provide some guidance for. MTC 06 transit service guidelines, guidance on service development changes, as well as design standards and performance measures for our transit services. And when that policy was put in place, it was originally just for bus service. It predates our rail service. So we have updated that over the years. And with the adoption by this body of the Envision My Ride effort last year, there's some substantial changes to this. And you'll see that kind of in real time in action with the bus stop implementation strategy with the next presentation. Next slide. So at your seats today, we do have red line copies. Go back one more. Policy, if you don't mind, thank you. So we do have red line versions of this at your seats today, and this is for information only. We will come back for an action at the next MTC presentation for the adoption of these changes. For the MTC 05 travel markets policy, pretty minor changes. We didn't change the primary and secondary markets that you see there in front of you. Primary being primarily those of our ridership that need to use transit every single day, those without a personal vehicle to complete their trip. And where secondary markets are some of the markets that are made outside of the original 5 corridors, but also some of the markets that are outside the county as well. We did not change and substantively those two items. We did expand consistency with plans as amended and updated by the MTC. And there it talked about as amended by the 2030 plan, but really this body does the amendments of the plans, and so we corrected that. Centers, quarters, wedges, those that have been in Charlotte for a while, that was a term used for many years to talk about a land use vision and goal. That's not used in the same context as it is today, and so we replaced that with system plan corridors. And then with the adoption of Vision My Ride, we added high frequency corridors, because that's going to be a big move going forward with how we see transit expansion within Mecklenburg County. And we put that in the primary market area after the system plan quarters, the 5 original quarters within the 2030 transit system plan. So the more meatier changes with this policy update was with the transit service guidelines, MTC 06. We added whole new sections and did heavy revisions to many of the sections. And the changes are in the bullets that you see here around the bus stop design, the spacing of bus stops, providing some guidance on relocation removal of stops, benches, and shelters, amenities. We'll go into that in more detail with the bus stop presentation, and a service monitoring system to give us some guidance on how to make changes to our transit services. And with microtransit coming on board, what type of vehicles need to be assigned to that kind of service. Next slide. So I won't read breaking a lot of PowerPoint rules here, so I'm not going to read all the text on the slide here, but this is the meat of the change that's within the document that's in front of you. Through the Envision My Ride effort, we did update design standards, and those have been incorporated within the land development standards that we use each and every day with our local development community. We also wanted to put some language in there regarding mobility hubs. We talk a lot about mobility hubs and standard stops, and this lines up with the bus stop typology that I'll be talking about shortly with the bus stop presentation. Next slide. We're providing additional guidance and clarification on bus stop spacing for high-frequency services. That's a term that we're using more frequently now as it relates to the Vision My Ride effort, and around neighborhood connector and express stops to provide additional guidance on the actual spacing of the stops, as we receive requests many times and we need guidance on how that fits within the existing bus stop structure that we currently have. Next slide. So this is something, this was a new section that we added. We have a bus stop committee that we reinstituted since the pandemic that receives many requests to either add a stop, add a bench, add a shelter, all the things you can think about somebody might need for a bus stop, but we often get requests to remove a stop. And so we didn't really have like clear guidance or policy language for how and why we should move and when we should move a bus stop through. So this is providing us additional guidance for that effort. We see bus stops as a critical piece of an infrastructure of a community, like a street light, like a sidewalk, like a road, curb and gutter. You wouldn't ask to remove a curb and gutter, you wouldn't ask to remove a sidewalk. So bus stops should be in that kind of same category. And certainly that third bullet is where we want to have some strong language in that space that it was not our policy to relocate a bus stop when such action would negatively impact our customers' safety or comfort. And it should certainly not be based on the ethnicity, income level, or social status of the passengers using that stop. So we thought that was a critical add to this to provide guidance when we receive those requests. Next slide. So bus stop amenities, this will be more clear as I go through the next presentation. We want to create some guidance on when and where you put certain types of stops. At the most basic level, type A, there's no score there because we believe all of our stops should be accessible and have a waiting pad. And so that's something we're striving towards to create. Type B is a part of our scoring mechanism to get a bench. Type C would be with a shelter. And then mobility hubs are higher level amenities of stops, like an enhanced stop pair, so when stops are across the street from one another, a plaza where we would have more amenities for microtransit, and a mobility center, essentially a larger scale stop like a park and ride, like we have up and down Statesville Avenue in the northern towns, and as well in the town of Matthews. We have a new mechanism to create this scoring system. Prior to this proposed change, if you wanted to shelter, it was right around 25 boardings a stop, and a bench, somewhere around 12 to 15 boardings. That doesn't take long to run through your system to understand where you would be putting shelter. So providing more clarity on how we assign typology to stops is what the purpose of this change is. Next slide. We had for many years a monitoring system. This is one of those wholesale replacements that we have put in place. You'll notice that we have not actually put a target in the service monitoring system to indicate when we need to make a change to a route. Before, we had a system in place where we ranked routes against each other. If you were above one, it was good. If it was below one, it was bad. And then we would make changes and adjustments as needed. Over time, that system got everybody close to one. And so we think there's probably more nuanced approaches that we need to take to monitoring our systems. And with the implementation of microtransit, we have a new tool to begin this conversion. We will be developing targets to help us guide this. But with the huge ridership shifts that we have seen on passengers per hour, we did not include it with this update, and that would come with a future update. But we wanted the mechanism in place to help with the conversion of our microtransit services. Next slide. Vehicle assignment, this is pretty simple. With microtransit, we're going to have a new vehicle type within our kind of service portfolio, compared to our 40-foot bus, 30-foot buses, and microtransit could be any number of vehicle sizes, but smaller than a 30-foot to deploy with the new routes that we'll be putting in place. So next steps for this group, we'll be presenting to TSAC in June with these changes as for their guidance and comment. And then we'll come back as an action item to this board on June 28th for action. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions on those policy suggestions.
Yes, I believe Mr. Higdon, Mayor Higdon has a question.
Yes, Jason, could you send myself and everybody else that's virtual the red line copy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after this meeting, we'll send the copy out for everybody's review. Thank you, Mayor Higdon.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Chrissy?
I just want to make sure I understand that passengers per revenue hour are what is going to drive the scoring. So I guess my concern is, and I'm going to mention in my comments at the end of this meeting, a lot of routes have reduced service that was approved last August. So when you're running less service, you're going to have less passengers per revenue hour, not just because you run less service, but because it's less attractive for riders to use. Like, they're just going to give up if it comes once an hour. They're going to find another way to get around. So unfortunately, those are the stops that most need the benches and the shelters. So it's kind of like a vicious, or like a downward spiral, that when there's less service, you actually need more benches, but you're going to have less passengers per revenue hour because the service is poor.
Yeah, frequency drives ridership often, and so it's a very valid point. I think that as we implement microtransit, I think that'll help that, because we can then have additional resources to put back on fixed route, which would help bring up the frequency. But I think that you bring up a very valid point. We can certainly talk about this in more detail at TSAC.
Oh, Mr. Tillman, did you quit? Okay. Oh, all right.
Okay, so we'll be back in June with action on this item, and we'll send the red line copy out for everybody's review.
Okay, thank you very much. So now following the proposed changes on the bus stop improvement strategy, who's up next? Mr. Mock?
Oh, no, I got one more, yeah.
Oh, Mr. Lawrence, you're still up. Sorry about that.
These
You're
two are
one
very-
down, you're doing the second
Yeah,
part.
so these two are very related.
Sorry, I stepped away. I thought you were like,
It's okay.
okay.
So we've talked a lot about bus stops over the past couple of years with this group, and we've talked about coming back to you about what is our strategy on bus stops, and how are we going to get to a place where we put more amenities out, and how are we going to get to that place that we know we want to get to. And so I think it's important to note, we have essentially, two kind of guiding documents and maps that guide many of our capital improvement strategies. Of course, with the 2030 Transit System Plan, we have the rapid transit corridors a part of that. And Vision My Ride is not only just for setting up a strategy for high frequency services, microtransit, but in that document that you all adopted last May, it indicated strategies to how do we get to ranking and prioritizing our bus stops to develop a bus stop capital plan. And that's what we've been really focusing on since that adoption, and that's what we'll go through tonight in detail. Next slide. And then we click it one more time, Paulus. And so this slide's been up in front of you many times. A lot of times we've talked about the high frequency service, the mobility hubs, or the microtransit bit. But the enhancing experience piece that was adopted is centered around bus stops, amenity, and ADA improvements. Next slide. And so today, this is what we would call probably our highest level for a current bus stop today. And this was a placemaking project we did off of West Boulevard in partnership with Keep Charlotte Beautiful. And you see, standard blue shelter. This has been our shelter product for almost 20 years now. To the left there is the trash cans that we use. We get those through solid waste services through the city of Charlotte. But this is our current example of our best foot forward on our amenity program. And policy, if you click one more time. But in order to improve this condition and update and modernize this, we needed a strategy and a plan. We need to update policy guidance to give us the tools to put more amenities in place. We need a prioritized list. Think about sidewalk infrastructure. There's a sidewalk list. Ranking our bus stops from 1 to 3,000. We have close to 3,000 stops. Creating a score for each of those in a prioritized list so that we know what's most important to start advancing in a capital program. Staffing is very important. We have, since last May, added additional members to our team, to my team and Kelly Goforth's team, Director of Development, to better staff up the needs for a capital program. I have a bus stop planner. I have service planners that develop lists. Kelly has engineers that are assigned to moving these things forward, and we've been focusing hard on that in the past year. Funding is another piece. It's not listed on here, but it's very important. Currently in the budget coming into 24, we have close to $2.5 million we can put towards bus stop amenities, and that is a part of what I'll detail today. And then having contracts in place, having a contract for amenities, contracts for public art and design and construction. All of these things that are listed here are what we've been working on over the past year to put us in a good place to start putting bus stops out in the field, improvements to bus stops. Next slide. So how do we determine the process for the bus stop typology? It goes back to the policy document that you just saw. We came up with a scoring mechanism to not only just look at ridership for shelters or for benches, but how long is somebody waiting for a stop? If somebody's waiting 60 minutes for a stop versus somebody who's waiting 10, you could argue that person waiting longer needs more shelter from amenities. And so putting that into the mix, the profile, the demographic profile of the area that the person is waiting in, and activity generators, affordable housing, hospitals, medical institutions, is critical to understanding that need. Next slide. And just not go in detail on this, but this is part of how we're making these decisions, putting these all into a list, assigning a score, and adding it up, and then coming with that with each individual stop. Next slide. And so taking those scores and then looking at our typology, that was a part of the document, the policy changes that you just saw, from a type A, which is just a waiting pad, all the way up to a mobility center, which will be a large-scale park and ride, assigning this typology to every single stop through the scores that we created through that scoring mechanism I showed a few slides earlier, is what we have done to every stop within our service area. Next slide. Then, once you have that typology in place, how do you prioritize that? How do you develop a mechanism to start creating the priorities for that? And so we have proposed looking at it from the ADA transition plan that was just completed for all of our stops. We must make our stops compliant. They all have a severity score, putting that into the mix for here. What are the activity ranking destinations served, and wheelchair boardings along a route, and then ridership, the boardings and alignings, and then the equity factor, looking at the demographics of the rider, but also the area as a whole, assigning points to each of those categories, and then creating a scoring for all the routes, and then ranking them from, like I said, from 1 to 3,000. And then on the next slide, that's the final filter that we put that through, was to take out stops that we already have in place through like a streetscape project or a land development project where we have requested pads, taking them out of the mix because those will be paid through others. And then prioritizing stops that don't have any amenity at all. So if you've already got a shelter, it may be out of date, but at least you do have a shelter, making sure we're prioritizing those that don't have anything, that don't currently have a boarding area, and customer requests, but also ensuring that they're spread geographically, so they're not just all in one part of town or one part of the county. And we developed an initial list of 30 to begin with 25 in Charlotte, 5 across the town. We will look at 26 stops through that mix to accommodate a shelter. And then as a kind of a batch point 2 to this is 16 additional stops that we added in this first batch. So think about this just under 50 stops is our first batch of projects that will move forward on the bus stop list. We're also working with the City of Charlotte and the Corridors of Opportunity, taking advantage of that program to find places to include amenities, looking for other grant fundings through CRTPO. Worked with the Corridors of Opportunity team for a raise grant along Sugar Creek to improve mobility hubs and stops along that. So we're seeking additional fundings, not just completely relying on our own budget for some of these improvements. Next slide. We also thought, well, there may be some stops that have really old shelters that may not have made that priority list. So we looked at all of our shelters, looked at the condition of all of those, and looked at their severity score on the other end, maybe stops that did not need as much ADA improvements, and developed another package of stops for shelter replacement, and that'll be added to our list as well. Next slide. So I'll just go through a couple of these, and I'll apologize for the last bullet of this because it is a bit overwhelming to see how many stops that we have. But our initial list, 30 stops spread throughout the county. And on the next, those additional 16 that we identified that should be a part of, right after that batch of 30, shelter replacement. And then improvements for other projects, and that's indicated in black there through land development, other city or town projects. And then remaining stops, we have close to 3,000 stops. And I think it's a bit overwhelming when we start thinking about all of the stops, but we have strategies in place that we think that could potentially reduce the number of stops that we'll be bringing in front of you all, consolidation. We have a lot of legacy stops that have been in place for a long time. And being more, with microtransit coming on board, we'll also be reducing stops and doing more focused stops at key destinations. So that number is going to change, and you'll see that throughout the rest of this year. Another key piece for this is what is our procurement strategy for making sure that we have the right contracts in place to purchase amenities. Before, years ago, we had a bench contract. We used our trash cans from solid waste. We had a shelter contract, the semi-seat that you see out there throughout the community. So our new contract approach, which was recently approved, will allow us to do shelter, benches, trash cans, solar lights, bike racks, and glass, all in a single kind of contract. So that is going to enable us a lot more efficiency. We also issued an RFQ for public art in May. Proposals are due in June, artist selection in July. Do public outreach this summer because the product that you see in front of you, this is the product that we'll be rolling out to replace our shelters and for new shelters. That's a lot of glass, and we have seen when art is in the shelter, they're less likely to be damaged. And so we've seen great success with that, and we want to have a kind of a standard public art program for many of our shelters as we go forward, and there'll be a public art outreach piece of that. Yes, Mayor Knox.
Jason, where does the funding come from for the public art?
So that would be a part of our total budget for the bus, and I think it's 1% of our total construction costs.
It's 1%
okay. Yeah.
of the total cost.
Okay, so
Mayor Higdon has a question since you stopped a moment there. Mayor Higdon?
Yeah, on the previous slide, the depth of the shelter looked incredibly narrow. Is that more narrow than our standard blue shelter?
Yeah, so on the slide, it's kind of hard to see on the one that has kind of the fret-looking design. That's a wider shelter. The one on the right-hand side, that's our Sprinter model that's out on Wilkinson Boulevard, and it's pretty narrow. I mean, it's about 1.5 feet, 18 inches there. The other is probably about twice that. This shelter is very customizable. I think if we have areas that have a lot of boardings, we could look at the wider glass, but many of our places will go with the more narrow concept. Now, I think also the angle of what you're looking at there is kind of a fisheye lens is probably distorting that somewhat. But that is more narrow than our current Brasco model that you see out in the field.
Thank you.
Yes. Another thing that we'll have through this procurement on the next slide, the ability to purchase solar lights. And we have 3 that will be looking for locations throughout the community that has a 5-minute lighting time through a push button. And the great thing about it is it can fit right on top of our existing bus stop. And so we think this is a great thing that we would like to start rolling out and be a part of this program. We can also have the opportunity to incorporate that within the shelter, but this is a great way for maybe stops that just have a waiting pad or a bench that we can do a solar light. So we'll be piloting this on a couple locations throughout the community and into the summer. Additional strategies, it's not just about how we look at just the amenities, but how do we partner with the community and other agencies for funding. So we're looking at funding through CRTPO, aligning bus stop improvement lists with all of the priorities that we hear from each of your town staff. We do think that we can start to consolidate our bus stops and make our bus stops our services more efficient. And so that'll be a part of our consolidation effort. Through Keep Charlotte Beautiful, we're doing an adopt-a-stop program similar to the adopt-a-street program that you see throughout. And we'd love to partner with the towns with similar kind of beautification projects. And then in our uptown area, we're at a point where we need to really look at the signage that's in uptown and really updating that. It's been there for a long time, and that'll be something else we'll bring to you at a future date. And the eye-level display, that's the schedules that are on each stop. We're going to be removing those and replacing them with a more nimble way to look at your schedule. We have a pilot that's been in place on Route 9 Central Avenue for almost a year now, where you can scan a QR code and it'll tell you exactly when that bus stop is coming. So we're going to see how that is looking and see if that's something we can deploy system-wide. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. This is something we've had for many years to come to you, and I feel like now we're at a place where we can really start seeing improvements roll out in this calendar year and into future fiscal years.
We have a question from Mr. Thunberg.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Jason, has there been any consideration to having cats have video surveillance there, or is there any consideration to allowing the authorities to have video there? And if yes, is there a policy regarding privacy disclosures and how things like that would be handled within the organization?
So Mr. Thunberg, I want to be clear on what your question. Are you requesting video surveillance at our bus stops? Is that what you're asking, or?
No, I'm asking if you're making a provision for that, and if so, how is that going to affect privacy concerns with regards to the people that are utilizing those bus stops? And would you, if you were going to have video, would there be a mechanism in place that would allow you to share that information with the authorities, but have the approval of to respect the privacy of the individuals that were videoed?
So through this, we are not recommending or proposing video to be a part of, our cameras to be a part of the amenity package for bus stops. And I imagine that if that were the case, that would be similar to the policies we have in place for what we have on our vehicles for bus and rail.
Mr. Thunberg, did you hear the response?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, now, Ms. Soshlin?
So first of all, thank you for this. I think TSAC has been itching to see a list of bus stops that are going to get amenities for quite a while. So I'm thrilled to see an actual list. I just had a couple of thoughts I wanted to put out there on this. One funding scenario, I know Columbus, Ohio has an adopt-a-stop, not in the maintenance sense like here, or maybe I should call it a sponsor a stop, where people can pay, it's like $1,500 for a semi-seat at a stop. Maybe you could like identify the next rung of 30 stops on the list and put them up. It'd basically be like advertising. But $1,500 for a semi-seat is a pretty good deal. I also, one of the reasons that I asked for TSAC and the Bike Advisory Committee to have a joint meeting in December, I know bike racks are part of some of the different bus stops. I know this is a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but I'd really encourage working with Dave Campbell at CDOT about this, because I get around mostly by bike and transit, and there's no way on this planet I would leave my bike at a bike rack next to a bus stop, because anyone walking by knows the owner is gone. So it's like, steal me. It just seems like if they aren't going to be used, don't spend the money. And I certainly support bike parking, but not in a way that are going to get stolen. Also, did I see on one of the slides that about the solar lights that there's going to be e-paper displays for schedules?
That was another proposal from the company that proposed, that we're working through on the solar. We haven't made it far with that conversation, just given the cost of the demonstration for that. We're just going to focus on the solar light for now. And I will just kind of go back to a couple other comments. I mean, through the adoption of the UDO in the city of Charlotte, we'll have probably a lot more opportunities to work with private development if they choose to, purchase a shelter, purchase amenity as a part of their traffic impact analysis. So that's something that we need to figure out what that means for us. So we could be an opportunity to receive funding from private partners to do things like that. And often we do have people approach us to say, well, what if I pay for it? So we got to work through some of the mechanics of that, how we receive that money and do that. And then as far as the bike racks go, I think that really is a case-by-case basis. I mean, we do have the rack and ride. People do tend to take their bikes with them. So we've actually had requests for people to have wider slats because people's tires are much larger now than they were when we first put the racks on. So a lot of conversations around that.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Altman?
Thank you. I guess I have a question about bus improvements, but also on the previous item regarding streamlining certain routes. I'm pretty new to CARPO. I've only been on that board, like 3 or 4 months, but it seems like they have a geographic ranking process that seems to try to address the issue of geographic equity. I mean, obviously, the city of Charlotte is much larger. It should have more amenities, but still there does need to be, a rough equity. And what is the process for decision-making around bus stops, bus stop amenities? It looks like, well, you said, I think 25 of the stops are the city of Charlotte getting improvements and just 5 in all the towns will be getting. There will only be 5 in the towns that are getting upgrades. So I sort of have a global question about what is the process to sort of address that sort of geographic equity in a fair way?
So I think it probably comes in 2 steps. One, making sure we've got stops in the right locations. And as we think about, as we deploy microtransit in Huntersville, Cornelius, and Davidson, we have many stops on the Village Drive that are really underutilized, and they're in places that are probably very difficult for us to even put amenities in place. So I think as we looked at locations that we feel fairly certain will remain in place once microtransit is deployed, like the Ada Jenkins Center in Davidson, or at the Brighton Town Center in Huntersville, or along Catawba and Cornelius. Those were locations that we ensured that were part of this first batch. And this really is just the first batch. We have another 16 right behind that. And then it will, as we go through improving the stops, it will be probably easier over time as a whole to improve the town stops because there are not as many. For example, in the town, I think it's the town of Huntersville has 73 stops. And so if we go in and reduce a significant number of those through microtransit, and then if we're able to improve 5, 10, or 20 stops, we're getting close to almost getting all the stops improved within a single jurisdiction. So I think as we go through that, I think that will balance out over time. The Charlotte stops are just over 90% of our total stops, total 3,000 are within the city. But we purposely put in that geographic piece because if we went solely on ridership and densities, then it would be difficult they would be focused in probably very small segments of the Charlotte area. So we're really cognizant of the need to do that geographically.
Yeah, I certainly want to, I hear from residents who live outside the center of the county, and they say they cannot access public transit, like straight up. So I appreciate you continuing to keep your eye on that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. So moving to our first action item, it's on the Silver Line for the Amity Garden Station LPA recommendation, and Mr. Mock is up for that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So tonight we're going to talk about the action for the Sharon Amity removal, Amity Gardens station removal that we talked about information, but we also have an informational item first. If you go to the next slide, Paul's. Thank you. So the first thing we really want to talk about today is a kind of some new analysis that we've been working towards with really getting into a vehicle maintenance facility selection for the Link Silver Line. Just at a high level, it's really critical to move forward with a plan to acquire and plan for and design a maintenance facility for the Silver Line, because the existing maintenance facilities on the Blue Line, both at the North Yard and the South Yard, are at capacity. We'll be buying, with the Silver Line, we would be buying a brand-new fleet of light rail vehicles, which would all need to be accepted, stored, operated, and maintained at new facilities designed by the Silver Line. Next slide. So we've done a number of analysis with some screening criteria, which have really started with a 15, shooting wide and saying how many potential sites do we see, and there's a number of engineering and operational and community type of criteria that we need to balance. And having gone through that over the last couple of years, we really kind of boiled that down to 3 potential sites. To the top of the back, you see the star. That's the North Yard, and that is adjacent to the existing North Brevard light rail facility that was built with the Blue Line. That there's a small maintenance facility that the Blue Line extension acquired and constructed. There was also a remnant piece of property that was owned by Norfolk Southern. It was an abandoned intermodal yard that CATS has acquired. It's also adjacent to the existing Norfolk Southern rail yard. So there's a good synergy of railroad type industrial uses around it. Another, go back, please. There we go. There's 2 other ones. There's one at called Industrial Drive, and that's within the town of Matthews, right to the west side of Matthews Township Parkway. And then there's a third at near CPCC Levine, and that's out right on the edge of Mecklenburg County, Union County line. A couple of distinctions there between those alternatives is that the industrial site near Matthews Township Parkway is another site that's very industrial in nature. There's a lot of existing industrial uses there. There are existing businesses that would be relocated if this were to be acquired, and we're having some outreach on that right now. The site near CPCC is a much more kind of greenfield site, but there is a lot of interest from the ownership of Mecklenburg County, CPCC, Hendricks, and others on this site, as well as the railroad. Next site. So when we've gone through this and looked at how would we see, based on our preliminary operating plan for how we will accept, operate, and maintain vehicles, we think that the best thing to do is to split the fleet in 2 separate maintenance facilities, which would be designed and built with the Link Silver Line. And there's a couple kind of key nuances here. A lot of these are based on the way that we would foresee the operating of the Silver Line in relationship to the Blue Line. One key thing is when you kind of look at the details, if you house all your vehicles at the North Yard, then all your Silver Line vehicles would have to traverse a short section of track along with the Blue Line. And that makes the Blue Line tracks very congested with light rail vehicles as we're trying to pull out in the morning and pull in the evening. So it would really create problems with existing operations on the Blue Line. It would also create a single point of failure. So if there would be any sort of track problem, track kinks, a tree falls on the catenary or anything on that small section of track between the North Yard and the CSX Railroad, it would create an outage, a complete outage on the Silver Line. So there's a real kind of risk of housing all of our vehicles at the North Yard. Because of that, we think that it makes sense to split the fleet between the North Yard and a facility on the southeast. Now, the North Yard programming, what we would foresee is a heavy maintenance facility so that we could do overhauls and rebuilds if necessary on that site. It's a large site, it's suitable to that sort of activity. But we can also do daily servicing and routine maintenance both at the expanded North Yard as well as the new southeast facility that we would propose. As far as capacity for the southeast facility, we would propose a site that could handle 75% of the needs of the Link Silver Line fleet, and 25%, that would be the split we would propose, 25% daily servicing at the North Yard, 75% the southeast. And again, the more we shift away from the North Yard, the less pressure we put on the Blue Line and the amount of vehicles that would be forced onto those tracks. So either one of the sites, CPCC Levine or Industrial, are conducive to those operations. Our preliminary evaluation indicates that Industrial Drive would be our desired southeast site because it's already within an industrial area, so it's more consistent with the surroundings, and it has good operational connectivity to Center City, good road network connectivity, and it's efficient towards the end of the line, minimizing deadheads. Next slide. So there's a lot of engineering and operations stuff there. That's all important, but there's certainly other considerations and community considerations that we need to take into account. And because we intend to pursue federal funding, that requires us to go through a Title VI equity analysis for maintenance facilities. And really that is a demographic analysis of the census tracts that bound the sites that we prefer. And the requirements of that is that we have to evaluate if there's any disparate impacts on minority communities. And if there are, then we need to be able to provide substantial and legitimate justification, or we have to demonstrate that there's no alternative sites with less disparate impacts. We're in the middle of that process right now. In fact, last night we had a public meeting with the areas, all 3 sites. We sent out a quarter mile, to all the properties within a quarter mile. We sent out in the yard signs and all the full outreach. And we had a good public meeting last night with some good comments. We also have a live survey that's open till June 6th. I request any folks want to take that, especially folks listening online who may be close to any of those sites. Please feel free to take that survey. It will be open till June 6th. If you have any questions, please reach out to us and we will address them. But this will also be going on. There will also be ongoing coordination with CAT Civil Rights, who administers CAT's civil rights plan, Title VI plan, and that analysis will then also come back to the MTC for information and action, and that will probably be this summer. And then we will then have, once we go through that process, we would then have a preferred site that we could pursue into NEPA, which would be the National Environmental Policy Act. Okay, next slide. So let me pause there because we have 2 different things going on, see if there's any questions about the maintenance facility strategy that we're pursuing before I get into the action. And that first topic was just an informational item of ongoing engagement. Okay. Okay.
Hey, Angie, I just want to concur that as far as the Matthews sites are being proposed, Industrial Drive would be far better choice than CPCC due to all of the activities that you mentioned. We're building a police training facility very near there, and of course the Hendrick rezoning is going to bring an advanced manufacturing campus there. I don't think it would be a good choice to go to that location.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Next item was something we came for information last month, and it was about a proposed change to the locally preferred alternative for the Link Silver Line related to the removal of the Amity Garden Station. Just out of context, here's an area map with the yellow box around the proposed station that's in discussion. Next slide. As a reminder, this is a kind of an image of kind of the layout of the station and the alignment. As we talked about last month, there's a significant vertical difference between the neighborhood, which is really the only people who are served by this station, about 60 feet, and there's really no practical way to get people down there in a premium and comfortable way. When we presented this to the public, there's a lot of concurrence on that the access was very limited, and to actually build the station and to build all the access required, it would be pretty impactful to the community and have some significant real estate and residential impacts. Next slide. So just at a high level, as far as benefits and risks, by removing the station, we save about 2 minutes of overall corridor travel time. That benefits the whole project and benefits ridership. For local connectivity, there's really no good way to provide access from the community because of the existing topography and the kind of the site conditions. And there's really limited development opportunities because of the storm drainage facilities on site, as well as the existing auto-oriented uses. Next slide. As far as risks go, there is a cost savings, about $10 to $15 million of removing the station. As far as environmental considerations, removing the station has less potential impact on residential properties and treescape and other things in the backside of the properties. So our proposed MTC action is the removal of the Amity Gardens station, as shown here, and a slight realignment of the Silverline Guideway, which you see here as the dashed purple, and that would allow us to increase our operating speed beyond just stopping at the station. Next slide. So as a summary of our engagement, we've had a lot of focused engagement with the adjacent communities, both Oakhurst, Amity Gardens, Charlotte East, which is kind of an amalgamation of several different neighborhood communities. We had some focused conversations with District 5 Council, and we come back to the MTC last month. We've been to CTAG, now tonight for action. One thing to note is once this action, assuming this action is approved and adopted, then we would be jumping directly into the NEPA process as well as the engineering process to move forward the Silver Line as a whole. We would be then going out for public meetings in the September timeframe as far as our environmental scoping. So it's a critical point for us to make this decision and move forward.
All right, any questions about the Amity Gardens Station LPA recommendation? This is something that was presented at our last meeting and requires an action by this board. Is there a motion to approve the Silver Line recommendation? One of our
Are
voters.
we allowed to vote virtually or not?
I don't think, no.
We can, but we run the risk of doing.
Okay, I think it's risky, but how would you vote? And then maybe someone can suggest. So.
I would vote yes if I'm allowed to vote, because that makes total sense to me, but if I'm not allowed to vote, that's fine, and I know Jack's virtual as well.
So we do have enough, and I do say that this is something that the neighborhood has, okay, we've gone through it. It is actually going to make, I think, the train more accessible, and so I have not seen, so Mayor Bales was
ready.
recognized. There you go, Mayor Bales.
I'll make the motion that we remove the Amity Gardens station.
I'll second.
And there's a second, and is there any further discussion? And so if you would please vote with Mayor Higdon. So, all in favor, raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, so that's unanimous, so thank you. That completes that item. Now, next, we have the fare capping analysis. Mr. Watson, I mean, it just seems like we should just keep this going and moving pretty quickly with it.
I'll be very quick, I promise.
All right, thank you.
My name is Terrence Watson. I work in CAT Civil Rights Office as a Transit Compliance Officer. I'm here in the stead of Orlando Rouse, who's representing the organization at the National ADA Conference in Kansas City. So at your last meeting, you received a presentation by him on fare capping and our fare equity analysis for that particular option. Just to remind you, as part of that analysis, Mr. Rouse determined that there was no disproportionate burden or disparate impact in connection with fare capping, which is basically a benefit to all of our patrons. It's a process whereby the CATS app tracks your purchases, and when you get to $88, you functionally get a monthly pass. So you don't have to worry about having the upfront cash to get the monthly pass. All of our patrons will be able to receive that benefit as they progress throughout the purchases throughout the month, which is great. Next slide, please. So you ask yourself, why do we have to do analysis for something that's obviously great for everyone? The fact is, as a federal funding recipient, we have to make sure that we don't engage in unintentional discrimination against based on race, color, and national origin for this, which is a benefit. Next slide, please. When we do that analysis under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, what we focus here based on the FTA guidance on minority, which is anyone who doesn't fit within the parameters of white, non-Hispanic, and low-income patrons who are persons who are at the poverty guideline levels of the Health and Human Services Department. Next slide, please. Within our own policy, which mimics the federal guidance, as you can see, whenever we have a change in the type of media, meaning if we add a media in this case, we have to conduct a fare equity analysis, which is why I'm giving this presentation. Next slide, please. Fare capping, as I mentioned, is a process in which we're tallying all your purchases on the CATS app throughout the month, and we hit the mark of $88, which is our dollar figure for our local monthly pass, you receive the monthly pass. It's going to help all of our patrons with upfront costs. They don't have to worry about having that cash on hand to get the benefit. As I said before, it's available to everyone, and our pilot program started in last September. Next slide, please. Okay, only certain fares are going to apply, meaning the regular one-way, the day pass, the weekly pass, all those tabulate up into a monthly pass. And it's based on full fare. And there'll be some that will not be included. Reduced fares for local buses, fares such as express and regional are not counted toward the cap. Only the ones you see there at the bottom, which is the one-way to day pass and the weekly. Next slide, please. We analyzed our customer purchases for 4 months in 2022. As you can see, the vast majority of purchases by our customers are on the one-way ticket. Then you see, of course, the numbers start declining as you go from day pass to weekly pass. And there's almost an equal comparison between monthly and weekly pass purchases. So you see the process is we have a lot of patrons who particularly would benefit from fare capping. Next slide, please. Among our minority customers, definitely we saw that they would fit into as far as their purchasing practices, they would benefit from fare capping. Low income, slightly higher than the system-wide usage, but they still would benefit. We saw both categories would benefit from this particular option. Next slide. Okay. Minority customers, definitely, as I said before, you can see there at 1,600 purchases at the top, and that's just for the one-way. If you go to the bottom, you can see that it takes up a huge chunk of their purchases using the one-way pass. So definitely, if they were tabulating those single ride passes, and some, of course, their day passes, and some the weekly passes, they'd hit the $88 mark fairly quickly throughout the month, and it would be a benefit to them. Next slide, please. Low-income customers, interestingly enough, their pass type purchase practices, they are purchasing a lot of weekly passes. And we saw that it is, of course, some cost savings, but if you look at how much a weekly pass costs, which is $30, and how much a monthly pass, which is $88, if they're purchasing 4 passes throughout the month, they're looking at a cost increase of almost $30. So it's much more benefit if they were able to purchase the monthly pass through fare capping at $88. Next slide. So what we found is basically fare capping is good for all of our customers, in particular for our minority and low-income patrons. We're looking at a process where they can tabulate and they get to a point within the month where they don't have to worry about finding additional funds after they reach the $88 month. Of course, this only references active passes. The reason I say active passes is because in the CATS app, you can buy a pass, hold on to it for 60 days. The only way we can catch you is if you actually activate the pass, obviously. So this will be a great tool in our toolbox to help assist our low-income patrons and our minority patrons, and generally everyone who wants to take a ride on CATS. And that's all I have. Any questions? Next slide, please.
Any questions? I'm sorry. Who's up there? Mayor Higdon.
Yeah, just a quick question. I don't have any issue at all. I think it sounds like a great program, but I was just curious, how does CATS determine what the race or income is of their passengers? How do they know? How did you get the data?
Sorry. We actually have survey data, and as well we do analysis of our system-wide footprint to realize, to actually quantify where our patrons may live, and as well who those riders are. So we have data on both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, hearing none, is there any further discussion on the fare capping, which I think turns out to be a really great program for us? So may I have a motion to approve the fare capping policy? Mr. Mayor Knox is going to make that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Altman. All in favor, raise your hands. And that is unanimous. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Watson. All right. Do I need to do a special one on the updated fare policy? Does the policy also need an adjustment?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, the previous
Are you
presentation was
going to go through that
to-
for us?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is our policy, so we just talked about the numbers, the cost, and now we're on policy.
Yes, thank you. Kelly Goforth, Director of Development, and I'm going to provide an update, information for action tonight on an update to the FAIR policy. The previous presentation was on the Title VI analysis, so that action, I believe, was intended to be approving the Title VI analysis, not approving the policy itself. So this will go through the policy update, including the FAIR cap.
Okay.
Okay, so tonight, there are two areas in which we're proposing to update the FAIR policy. One is to add the FAIR capping policy to MTC 02 FAIR policy, and also to modify the University All Access Pass FAIR policy. As we discussed at the budget approval last month, there's no proposed changes to the FAIR rates or the FAIR structure as part of this update. So the first proposed change is to add this new section on the FAIR capping policy. And I'm not going to read this since you just had this presentation on what the FAIR capping is, so we're adding a section in the policy related to it. The next area is to propose a change to the All Access Pass policy. This program was originally added to the FAIR policy in 2017, and the All Access Pass program is based on the premise that all members of an organization are charged a greater discounted fee, then the price would be significantly lower for each person, which would incentivize use as well as result in an overall increase in FAIR revenue to CATS. The MTC policy required that each agreement be brought to the MTC as it was negotiated. And so the proposed change to the policy tonight is to set specific terms for a university all access pass policy. It would set the rate at $25 per semester and $50 per academic year. It would require that participating universities opt in for all students, but allow faculty and staff to opt in individually. This is consistent with the current agreement we have with UNC Charlotte for an all access pass. But this policy would now allow all accredited colleges and universities to opt into the program with no additional MTC approval required if it's consistent with the key terms included in the FAIR policy. Future increases would be subject to MTC approval and capped at 3% per year. And just for informational purposes, I've shown the formula that we've derived the $25 rate. It's based on the average daily users of the All Access Pass based on recent survey times the monthly local pass fare times 4 months in a semester divided by the total student enrollment. And so that's how we derive the $25 per semester per student. We're currently in discussions with 3 universities regarding the All Access Pass: UNC Charlotte, CPCC, and Johnson C. Smith University. And as I mentioned, any university could opt into this program. In the policy that you have in your packet, there's a red line policy. There's some additional minor changes that we're asking for adoption of the policy tonight.
All right. Any questions about this policy change? I just want to say, I want to commend this effort being expanded. I believe that this is one way that we can keep our young people safe as they decide to travel into Solo and South End and all of those other places of entertainment and fun. But I also believe it helps us towards our goal to reduce the amount of vehicle traffic between the schools and the various locations that they want to go, because this will be a way to, I think, help them reduce their exposure in so many ways. So thank you very much. And it has been a very big success at UNC Charlotte. Ms. Ashland?
Mayor Lyles, I wanted to just add on to that, to piggyback on your comment. I think that especially for the city of Charlotte with the mode share goal of getting to 50%, I would love to see, and I mentioned this to Kelly at our last TSAC meeting where she presented this, this would be a great opportunity for Center City Partners or the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance to work with major uptown employers to do a program like this. I mean, there's already like a 10% discount that CATS offers, which is pretty minimal, but one where, say, a large bank were to buy transit passes for all of their employees in the uptown area would really move the needle on how people get to work, get people to try transit, and reduce our reliance on single occupancy vehicle travel.
I agree with you. I think a lot of it as well, not just the employers, but we've talked about this for apartment complexes, that you can come in and get a pass that if you work in whatever part of town, if you can get there on a bus faster, better. We want to try to do that. So hopefully this grows and continues to grow. Any other comments or questions?
Yes.
All right, Commissioner Altman?
I just want to underscore what Ms. Exelon just said. I think that's really wonderful, and I'm glad to know that it's being considered for apartment complexes as well, because we really are trying to go for culture change so that we can, I mean, obviously, people love their cars, and that's fine, but as we have more and more people come here, to the extent we can expose people and encourage them to try mass transit, it's just a great win. So I love the suggestion that both of you made, and I hope we really can do that.
Thank you. Is there any other comment or question? Hearing none, I think we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a motion? Do we need a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the MTC O2 fare policy update.
Thank you. Second, we have a second. All in favor, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. All right, thank you very much. All right, so now we're going to hear from our advisory committees. We'll start with Ms. Ushlin, and then we'll go to Mr. Tillman and Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Lyles and members of the MTC. At our TSAC meeting, I think we heard a lot of the same presentations tonight with the fare capping analysis and the fare policy update, as well as about bus stops, although we hadn't seen the list of actual stops, so that was exciting to see. I did just want to make sure, since I've got the microphone, to touch on, again, the bus service cuts that TSAC and MTC approved last August as a result of the bus operator shortage. Those cuts are about to become permanent once they will have been in place for a year. You know, TSAC members approved those cuts on the understanding that service would be restored incrementally as more operators were hired. It seems there's still a labor shortage. So I don't know if the labor contract that was approved wasn't enough to get more operators, or if there's some other reason that the shortage is still going on. But I just, you know, I feel like it's important as an advocate for riders to make sure everyone here at this dais understands the impact of those cuts. For example, if you take the number 16 bus down South Tryon, it used to run every 15 minutes, and now it's every 30. So that's literally half as many buses. There's stories like that across many popular routes. I don't feel like it comes up often enough, considering the impact it has on daily riders. I'm just concerned that this is becoming the new normal. The level of service we had before wasn't enough, and now it's even less. The hole is getting bigger to dig out of, and the bus is, fixed route service is the backbone of CAT's system. And I don't want the excitement over microtransit, which has its uses, but it sometimes may overshadow the importance of restoring the bus service that we used to have and need even more of. So I just want to make sure that stays on everyone's minds. The last thing I wanted to say, I'm glad that we have someone from NCDOT here tonight. The MTC website says that NCDOT holds a voting seat on the MTC. On Monday night, I spent my whole evening reviewing the minutes from every MTC meeting back through 2019, and NCDOT hasn't attended a single meeting until now. In January 2020, the then MTC chair and former Mecklenburg County Commissioner Susan Hardin asked why NCDOT had not been attending. That was the only time it's been mentioned in 4 years. I was wondering this is a question maybe for Kat's lawyer. I was wondering whose responsibility it is to make sure that voting members actually attend.
I have to address that question because as we began to look at this, and I had to call Mr. Lathrop, and he did not know he was a member. That was under the other administration that he did not know. And I said, did you know? And he was like, we're in other committees together. I mean, the events, I forget the rest of it. But, you know, he was attending, and I was like, what's going on? And he said he wasn't informed. And that rests with us, not him. So thank you for, yes, thank you.
Since we're on topic, I've been a member of the Board of Transportation for 6 years. I chair the Finance Committee. During that 6-year period of 12 meetings a year, I've missed 2. I'm a representative by virtue of my membership on the Board of Transportation on the CRTPO board. And I don't have an exact count, but I think I've missed less than 5 meetings over that time. I am also, up until a couple months ago, was the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Unified Development Ordinance in Charlotte. And I could count on one hand the number of meetings I've missed for that over the last 6 years. And the point of me saying that is to make clear that when I know that I'm on a commission or a board, I show up. And that I honestly did not know that I was on this commission. In fact, I was even asked to come and speak one time, back when John Muth still worked for CATS. And I came and did that. And nobody indicated to me that I was actually a member of this.
So I have to ask for grace. That's all we can do, Tony. That's all we can do.
And I didn't mean that personally.
Glad to be here.
And I didn't mean it as a personal affront to you, because I didn't know who the representative was, just that there wasn't somebody representing that seat. And so that's why I was wondering who oversees this. It was not a personal insult to you.
I didn't
Mr.
think you meant it that way, but I wanted to make sure that people who were not here didn't take it that way.
We're just glad you're here, Tony.
Especially like hanging out with you, Rusty.
So, any further comments, Ms. Ashland?
That's the end of my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tillman?
Mr. Parker will be delivering.
Mr. Parker is going to deliver. Okay, Mr. Parker.
Well, thank you. I know our time has been long here, so I think everyone wants to get out. I'll make it brief. At the CTAG meeting on 16 May, last Tuesday, we discussed outside the minutes and approval of the budget for the last meeting. We discussed many of the things that Mr. Mock discussed this evening, including the vehicle maintenance facility, as well as the Amity Garden Station proposals, the cost savings, the access problems, and the time savings associated with that. We also got into a little bit of discussion about why couldn't we just straighten out that little notch, what some people in the racing world might call a chicane in the route itself, to just essentially parallel US 74 there. And Mr. Mock gave the reasons for that. Beyond that, there wasn't much. It was a pretty short meeting, and that's all I have for CTAG.
Any questions for Mr. Parker or Ms. Ashland? Yes, Commissioner Altman?
Thank you. Mr. Cagle, could you address Ms. Exlon's, and is it Exlon? I want to be sure I'm saying it right.
Excellent.
Excellent, thank you. Could you address what she was raising about temporary cuts appearing to become permanent, and if you don't feel that you can tonight, to give it justice, if it could be added to the next agenda if you prefer?
I was getting something in one ear and I could not hear in the other.
Do you want me to repeat it? My question is, I think Ms. Exlon's question is a really important one about the temporary reductions in service that now appear to be coming permanent, and I do think that needs to be carefully addressed. If you feel prepared this evening, or if not, could it be on our next agenda?
Yeah, we're happy to put it on the next agenda. these will become permanent at the 1-year mark. We are anticipating that. We clearly, by making the changes, it has increased the reliability. And the operator situation, while it is getting better in some regards, is not sufficiently, we still have vacancies and not able to support returning the service levels to where they were before a year ago. It is our intention, as we are able to accommodate that with additional operators, to start to bring back service, but we have not been able to do that. And we are focused on reliability, so that we don't get back into a situation like we were about a year ago, where we had, somewhere between 8 and 10% missed trips monthly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that concludes our agenda for this evening's meeting. I wanted to just recognize that we have 2 scheduled meetings this summer, one being on June 28th and the other one July 26th. Now, I guess what we have done in the past is that staff will call to see if we have a quorum of the voting members, and to make sure that we have a meeting that's sufficient to take action. So as vacations and holidays are coming up, we just want to make sure that people are going to be available and in town. So with that, the meeting is concluded and we're adjourned. Do I need a
Move to
motion to
adjourn.
adjourn the meeting? Yes, I need a motion. We have a second. All in favor, raise your hands. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, those that are joining us. Okay, good to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Do I need a
Move to
motion to
adjourn.
adjourn the meeting? Yes, I need a motion. We have a second. All in favor, raise your hands. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, those that are joining us. Okay, good to see you.